Thank you for joining us for St. Petersburg Library System's Hispanic Heritage Month. We're going to talk about the difference between Hispanic, Latin A, and Spanish. A lot of people use these terms interchangeably, but there are actually key differences between them that I think are interesting and important to understand. Let's begin. A Hispanic person is a descendant of Hispania, modern-day Iberian Peninsula, which is Spain and Portugal. Spanish is related to Hispanic because Spanish is a term of nationality of people from Spain. So all Spanish people are Hispanic, but not all Hispanic people are Spanish. The definition of Hispanic in the U.S., though, is relating to Spain or Spanish-speaking countries, especially those of Latin America, or a Spanish-speaking person living in the United States, especially one of Latin American descent. Since Hispanic refers to what language people speak or what their ancestors spoke, it refers to an element of culture. That means that as an identity category, it's closest to the definition of ethnicity. It's not a race. People of different races and ethnicities can identify as Hispanic, so it's much broader than that and it's very complicated. You can think of people who originate from Mexico and people who originate from the Dominican Republic, and they'll have very different cultural backgrounds. Basically, the main thing they have in common is their language. Sometimes their religion and other cultural markers, but pretty much they're very different from each other culturally. Because of this, many people considered Hispanic today equate their ethnicity with their ancestors' country of origin. The first time Hispanic started being used in the United States was during Richard Nixon's presidency between 1968 and 1974. It first appeared in the U.S. Census in 1980 as a question prompting the censor taker to determine whether or not this person was of Spanish or Hispanic origin. There are roughly 60.6 million Hispanics in the U.S., which makes up to 18% of the total population, according to a Pew Research Center finding in 2019. Mexicans hold the lead, making up nearly 62% of Hispanics in the U.S., followed by Puerto Ricans and Cubans. So now we're going to talk about Latin A, Latinx, Latin, or Latino. The origin is from the Spanish word Latinoamericano, which means Latin American. Latin A and Latinx are gender-neutral terms. Latina is female, Latino male, and some people use Latino for everyone. I'll be using Latin A because that's my preference. It's important to note that most Latin A people in the United States do not use Latin A or Latinx. They prefer Latino or Latina. The gender-neutral designations are mostly used by activists and academics in the United States. It's all a matter of personal preference. Now, the definitions of Latin A are a native or inhabitant of Latin America or a person of Latin American origin living in the U.S. So right off the bat, the difference between Hispanic and Latin A is that Hispanic refers to language, culture, and Latin A refers to geography, where your ancestors were originally from or where you are originally from. The use in the United States started in 1997. Latino officially appeared in government documents as an option alongside Hispanic. It was not until the year 2000 that Latino first appeared in the U.S. Census as an option for ethnicity combined with the response other, Spanish, Hispanic, Latino. In the most recent U.S. Census conducted in 2020, it was included as another Hispanic, Latino, Spanish origin. The U.S. Census is a little complicated about this because you choose whether or not you're Hispanic or Latino and then you choose your race. So again, while some people use Latin A as a race, it's not a race. So let's talk about that. So race refers to biological differences. Ethnicities are a group of people within society that share things like culture, tradition, religion, race, ancestry. And nationality is a sense of belonging to a particular nation through origin, birth, and naturalization. These are important concepts to understand and the key differences between them. So we're going to talk a little bit about what comprises Latin America because that is actually a bit more complicated than it seems on the surface. So for that, we have to talk about where Latin America stems from. It is comprised of countries that come from any Latin-derived speaking country. So countries that speak Spanish, Portuguese, French, Italian, and Romanian. Those are the 5 Romance languages, and that's where Latin America stems from. However, Latin America is largely described as countries below the United States in the Western Hemisphere, North America, South America, Central America, and the Caribbean. This, however, is an incomplete definition because there are English and Dutch-speaking countries below the United States in the Western Hemisphere. There's Belize in Central America, which speaks English, In South America, there's Guyana, which also speaks English, and Suriname, which speaks Dutch. And then there are the many English and Dutch-speaking islands in the Caribbean. To really have a better, complete definition would be to include that they must be Latin language-derived countries. So back to Hispanic and Latin A. Now that I've complicated things a little bit, it's just a way of trying to simplify it. So Spain is just Hispanic. People like Antonio Banderas, Penelope Cruz, Javier Bardem, Enrique Iglesias are Spanish, which is their nationality, and Hispanic, which is their ethnicity. For Latin A, there's Brazil, French Guiana, Guadalupe, Haiti, Martinique, and St. Bartholomew. Carmen Miranda, Giselle Bundchen, and Neymar are Latin A, but not Hispanic. Hispanic and Latin A countries are Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, Nicaragua, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, Puerto Rico, Uruguay, and Venezuela. Jennifer Lopez, Ricky Martin, Shakira, Zoe Saldana, Gina Torres, and Yalitza Aparicio are both Hispanic and Latin A. This refers to both Hispanic and Latin A. Like I mentioned before, Hispanic and Latin A are not races. People of different races can be Hispanic or Latin A. This is because of the differences in ancestries across Latin America. You have the indigenous population, some of which are still in existence in many Latin American countries. For example, in Panama, there's still a very big indigenous population, and interestingly enough, more people speak their indigenous language than they actually speak Spanish. So that's still a very big racial component in their country. European colonization as well. In these cases, Spanish, Portuguese, and French. They established themselves in the New World and colonized these countries in the name of their homelands. Then we have the slaves from Africa who were brought over and also made a huge impact on the racial makeup of these countries. And then we are different races, ethnicities, and nationalities that consider themselves Hispanic or Latin A from all across the world. It wasn't just France, Spain, and Portugal. People that came to the New World and settled down, and that's why you have Asian Latin Americans, Middle Eastern Latin Americans, and more. You can find all of it. It's not just the strict European countries that colonize these countries. There are also countries from all across the world that settled in Latin America. For example, Italians in Argentina are very prevalent. So you get a very diverse set of people, more diverse than people seem to realize. We have a sort of look that we expect from Hispanic or Latin A people, but they can be very different. Latin A or Hispanic people are not homogeneous, even though they share many cultural aspects. But not everyone is comfortable with the terms Hispanic or Latin A. They feel like they're colonial terms and that they erase some aspects of their identity, or they're uncomfortable identifying with the history of colonization from their background. So many people of different Latin A or Hispanic backgrounds have preferences for how they'd like to be referred to as. For example, a large growing number of Black Latin A or Hispanic people prefer to go by Afro-Latin A, Afro-Latinx, Afro-Latina, Afro-Latino, or Afro-Hispanic because of their experience as a Black person and how that affects how they interact with the world. So they don't go just by Latin A, they prefer to include that part of their identity into their designation. Then we have, like I mentioned before, a great number of indigenous populations in Latin America that do come to the United States. Again, remember that these terms are mostly used in the United States. A lot of people who live outside of the United States don't really use these terms. So we have many people in the United States who still identify with their indigenous ancestry, not so much their Latin A or Hispanic ancestries. And again, a lot of them aren't strictly Hispanic because they come from cultures that don't speak Spanish, even though they come from a country that's considered Hispanic. Chicano is also a term that people use. Mexican Americans in the U.S. go by this term. Chicano used to be a derogatory term in the 1940s and 50s, but was reclaimed in the 1960s and 70s as an empowering term. It expresses solidarity, indigenous pride, and a way to divert from the Mexican American or Latin identity. So it is a term of resistance. It is a term of reclaiming that particular identity. Then we have people who just prefer to go by their nationality, sometimes hyphenated with American, like Cuban American, Mexican American, like I mentioned before. Some people of Hispanic descent reject these labels entirely and only consider themselves to be American, no qualifiers, and that needs to be respected as well. So who is Hispanic and Latin A? The Pew Research Center has a definition that I like. It is anyone who says they are and nobody who says they aren't. That might not be exactly correct, but I really like it because, again, people deserve to choose how they identify and where in their ancestry they identify from. Thank you for watching this presentation. If you have any questions, please email us at library.reference@stpete.org. Happy Hispanic Heritage Month!